All right, I think we are on the air. Close it all the way. All righty. Looks like everything's working online now, and we have a few people here also. My name is Norm Ellis. This is Grace Baptist Church. This is the Adult One Bible Study. Glad you're here with us in-house and online. And we're going to be today in Acts chapter 14. And the title is The Truth. And we'll be looking at these four. I know, where's the 3 points? We're at 4 points today. One is called Misdirected Worship. And that's verses 11 through 13 in Acts chapter 14. All these verses, the main verses, are in that same chapter. Second point is Proclaiming the Living God, 14 through 18. And the third one is Opposition Faced, 19 through 20. And our last point is going to be Encouragement Given, 21 through 23. And our main idea today is believers must declare Jesus to be the living God. We are in session number 3 today. And if you have a study course book, our study book, we are starting on page 28. So we'll put that down here as well. Page 28 through 36. There we go. I forgot to put that up there. Anyway, and let's see. That's the main point there. Yeah. So we have a question up here. In your family, what topics are considered to be out of bounds at holiday get-togethers? You know, like maybe Thanksgiving or Christmas. You've heard of those things before. You know, sometimes there's these things, you better not talk about this with Aunt Jessica here or Uncle Harvey or whoever it might be, right? It might set them off and we'd be in a big giant brouhaha, and then they'll get all mad, right? You've heard those kind of things before. Maybe they've happened in your family. I don't know. But what are maybe some topics that are considered out of bounds that you can think of that might come under that? Not necessarily in your family. I'm not saying that. Politics. Oh, that's a big one. Politics.
In some families, it's religion. Not in mine.
Okay, so also religion, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's another one that may be out of bounds that you can think of? How about, I know it sounds stupid, how about sports teams?
Oh.
You may have one side that's a Green Bay Packers, and boy, you better not talk about that game that was just on last week because the refs were on their side or whatever, right? Sports can sometimes be that way for some people.
Well,
don't you dare ridicule my Bears.
Yeah, that's right.
Sexual orientation.
Okay. So
there you go. I was trying to figure out how to put that.
We'll say that way. That sounds good. Maybe just sexual issues.
Lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
Lifestyle. I like that. That's a better one yet. We'll say it that way. Anything else come to mind? How about relationships? In other words, don't bring up anything about my ex at this thing, because it'll be so we can just say relationships, human relationships. We'll say human relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else that comes to mind? I'm trying to think of some ones. Now, under religion, it could be like within, like Christianity is a religion. It could be different things within Christianity or different things outside. So religion, we're going to say, covers
everything,
every aspect of it, not just like Christianity versus Islam or something like that.
No.
It could be a lot of different things, right?
Now I know people that one mate is like a Jew, and then the other one is Catholic or something.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah. Or Protestant and Catholic or something like that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But anyway, some of these things can be rather trivial. Now, I know people don't think that way, but sports can be rather a trivial thing sometimes.
To me it is, but to the person that's a sports avid person, it isn't. I mean,
I'm also going to put up financial issues.
yeah.
Now, I'm talking about within the family. I know that can be a bugaboo also. Well, you know, when Aunt Jessica died, she meant for me to get that picture.
Yeah.
Why is it hanging on your hallway or things like that? You know, I've heard of things like that happening. I won't say how close to home that can be, but it can be, right? So there's a lot of things that sometimes happen like that. Family grievances. That we kind of got. Well, no, I like that. That's grievances. Family
issues.
Family issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that could cover more than one thing, I'm sure. But yeah, you know, Uncle George, he never did pay me for working on his farm that one year when I was 14. I'm holding it against him.
Yeah. Well.
I'll tell you more about those things later.
Yeah. Well,
but I can speak from experience sometimes.
In family issues, the husband might want children and the wife is using birth control or something like that. But
one wants one, the other wants 9.
Yeah.
Or maybe one side inherited a whole lot of stuff and the other side is still real poor. You know, things like that come up too.
Yeah.
You know, and there's some envy going on and jealousies and things like that.
When I think of inheritance, basically is what it is.
Yes.
We're giving Mary 80% of the inheritance. The other 2 kids only get 20%.
Yeah, you get to split the 20.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
But there's those things that happen, and they cause a lot of controversy. Sometimes a lot of heartache. You don't speak to people for years. I could say about that too, but right now I won't. But you know, some of these things can seem petty or trivial. Some are quite important. You know. And they're not petty to the person arguing about it. We know that, but they can be relatively petty on those things. So, question: has your family ever been divided on the topic of Jesus? And that's a rather open-ended type of question.
My family hasn't, but I don't know people that I even. And divided. You know, and I think we're talking about at the core of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us, and whether that is something we need to take into consideration in our life or not. I think that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about petty things between one denomination or another. You know, well, I'm part of this Baptist church. Well, I'm part of this Baptist church. You know, well, we don't ever talk to those kind of people. We're not talking about that kind of things. But actually, we're going to the core of who Jesus really is, and you know, but. Some families have divided on that topic. You know, some people would say, well, you know, I don't believe there's a God. You know, I believe in science. You know, evolution. You know, we just evolved from this little primordial soup when lightning struck it one day, and a little thing crawled out. I mean, it goes that weird. It does. I've looked at this stuff, and so some people believe that. And when you bring up the fact that there's a creator that created all these things. They can't. It's beyond their brain to absorb, and they can't consider it because they've already bought into this other view. So there's these kind of things that happen in families as well. But anyway, even if there was a Big Bang theory, who created the Big Bang?
Yeah, well,
you know,
that's a common argument that they do. They'll put it to a place where you can't examine it. You know, there's even one that scientists have actually really considered, and I forgot the exact title for it. But basically, it's the aliens from this other planet came and seeded our planet with the animals and the humans, and then they left to do another one, and they're just going throughout the whole galaxy.
Yeah, that works for me. I kind of like that.
There's a fancy name for that. Anyway, but the problem that does is it puts it out of reach. Well, you can't say anything about this planet X over here. You've never been there. You can't say, you know, but somewhere the light said begins.
Yes, I have.
But anyway, it is quite an interesting thing. In our study course book, there's something called an intro paragraph. I like to read that. And I also have it in handout number 1. So you can look at handout number 1 if you want to follow along. It says, what is the most volatile subject in modern history. Many would say politics. We had a former president they attempted to kill not long ago. Trump. They shot him and they got him in the ear. Right. So anyway, but that can be a volatile subject, politics, right? But perhaps the greatest dividing line in history has been the nature of Jesus. Was he merely a healer and teacher? Or is he indeed the Son of God and the only Savior? Jesus warned his disciples that even families would be divided by their faith or lack of faith in him. In Matthew, and this is one of my verses I have up under additional verses, Matthew 10, 21 through 23. And I have that verse right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it for us. It says, Jesus said this to his 12 disciples, said, "Brother will betray brother to death, when a father his child, and children will rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved." Perseverance, right? And so, did Jesus warn us about these things? He most certainly did, right? He did warn us about these things. And so this is something we should take serious. The question says, what differing opinions of Jesus have you about Jesus are commonly heard today? What's some opinions you've heard people say about Jesus? Anything?
That he was a good man.
He's a good man.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
A leader or something like that.
And so it leads you to the impression of, well, that was about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all. He's just a good man. But was he the Son of God? Well, I don't ascribe that far. Would you read one of these for me?
Sure.
Okay. Here we go.
Maybe Polly was leaving again.
What's that?
Maybe Polly was leaving again.
Maybe she wasn't feeling well too. That sometimes happens too.
Yeah.
All right, where was I?
Went to get some pot liquor.
So another opinion I've heard is, well, he's just one of many other ascended masters.
Oh.
That's an Eastern religion. There's some cults, and I don't want to get into this or not, but some cults that believe that he was just a created being. Jesus was just a created being. He's not part of the Trinity. He always was, like the Bible says, by the way. But he was made later on. He was one of the created beings. Another one is that, well, he's one of many gods, and there's a god of this planet, just like there's a god of that planet over there, and a god of that planet over there, and he's just one of many gods, and we have to deal with him because he's our god and our planet. But, when we die, we can eventually become a god. Now, I'm not going to say who says those things, but I'm just saying there's these ideas out there. I'll talk more about it later afterwards. But there's a lot of views like that. And some people think, well, he really wasn't, he didn't really exist. People made these stories up, like they made the stories up about the Roman gods and the Nordic gods and the Greek gods and goddesses, all those things. The people just made him up, that he didn't really exist, or he was maybe a combination of different teachers.
But even in Roman history, they mention Jesus.
Well, I know. It's hard to get past history. I'm not saying these are viable hypotheses even. They're just things people say because they've heard stories. You're going to say, Steve?
I was just thinking you could almost go to the argument that his physical body was a created.
Yeah.
The physical, to be here on Earth, to assume our shape and everything else.
Yeah, there is that thought, but to go down that path is probably not the best path to go down, because it does say that he was with us. He was with God in the beginning. And it does. There's instances of what people would call a Christophany. A Christophany is a presentation that you can see, and maybe touch and feel, of a pre-incarnate Christ before he came to earth as Jesus would come later on. He was like with Daniel in the lion's den, because there's one. He was with the people in the fiery furnace. That's right. There was an extra person in that furnace. Remember?
Yeah, I do.
And it said one like the Son of God. Now it could have been an angel, but it also could have been a Christophany. This is a fancy $10 word. But we don't know. But we do know there's evidence that there's possibly that as well.
It's just to me, it's like he's here, but he's there, but in what form?
Yeah.
What was his form at that time? And to me,
And we don't know all the answers.
It's a nice thought. It's to get through, but to me it really doesn't matter because he showed up here on Earth. He took a form we'd all be familiar with, that we would know, and that's that.
I think so. It's agreeable to that. And the next question asks, how have your convictions about Jesus caused conflict with people who hold maybe a different belief? Have you ever come across that situation?
Yeah, good diehard Catholic I worked with.
Oh, yes. There's been a couple of Mormons I've talked to. And those have been interesting conversations.
Don't Catholics believe in Jesus?
Well, they do.
They do.
But there's extra things they add on. A lot of tradition things that the Catholics will add.
But there's so many scriptures.
Peter and Paul. And
they have a lot of traditions of the church, of the Roman Catholic Church that have come into the Catholic Church, and most Catholics would believe you need to believe those as well to be saved. And it's I'm not saying they all do. I'm just saying some have had that taught to them, and so they believe that.
Until I read here that some people believed that Mary was an eternal virgin. I mean, she had other children. I mean, it talks of other children.
I know. They had, believe me.
No, we got to ignore that. That didn't really happen.
They go through some really strange supposed logic paths to come to that. Yeah, I know. And we're going to do that one because we can't have time. But sometimes that happens, though, right? Our conviction about Jesus, sometimes that causes conflict with people who may hold different. Well, he's a good teacher. But, I can't say he's the only good teacher. There's other good teachers, that's my belief about Jesus. You can't change me. I've run on that kind of thought before, too. So there's a lot of those kind of things that come up. But Jesus can be controversial, and there are different opinions about that kind of thing. But we need to be ready to deal with them. This is what the principle of these questions is. It says, how have your convictions about Jesus caused conflict? We talked about that already. The gospel has always been divisive in some way. Jesus said, did he come why did he come? He came to what? Bring a sword, it says at one place. It caused
divisions.
Yeah. So we got to remember that there is that aspect of the gospel. Not everybody's going to accept it. Yeah. Some people will rebel against it. Some people will be violent almost in their rejection of it.
But there's so many scriptures in the Hebrew Bible that talk about. I mean, they predict Jesus' birth exactly as it happened.
I know.
So many.
Yeah. It's hard to refute that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's always been divisive, though. It offers a peace and salvation, right? But it also challenges something. It challenges our sinfulness. And when we come into that area, oh boy, that can be difficult to overcome because we all have our little, we'll call them rooms in our life that we don't want anybody to peek into. But Jesus knows all those areas of our life. And so that becomes a problem for somebody when they get that situation. They understand that challenge is there. So today's study, though, considers how we should prepare to demonstrate that Jesus is the living God, the only one, and in how we can deal with various responses that we may face. We've been talking about the first missionary journey of Paul and with Barnabas, and I think that was the main ones. But that particular, of course, the missionary journeys of Paul under that umbrella. And there's a map that shows that here, handout number 2. And it's also up on the board, but it's that small map. So I made a copy here a little bit bigger for us here. And remember, they stopped off at Cyprus first, right? Then they went on to Pisidian Antioch. Okay, and after that they went to, it says, locate Lystra. So Lystra would be, where is Lystra? Oh, right
just
there.
North of the west end of Cyprus Island if you go north.
Well, if you see a little white box that says Paul and Barnabas mistaken for gods, the little thing pointing to, that's one of the main places we'll be talking about, that area. And also we'll be mentioning Derby also. I think that's how you pronounce it.
It looks like quite a hike, but...
What was I going to talk about? Oh, understanding the context. There's an area in our study course book called Understanding the Context, which is pretty interesting to give you a thumbnail idea of what has been going on and before and during this study today. They were forcefully expelled from Pisidian Antioch. Remember that? And then they traveled eastward to Iconium. Then they continued the strategy of beginning with a local synagogue. At first, their message was received by the Jews and the Gentiles. God testified to the truth about Jesus as the missionaries performed compassionate miracles as well. Instead of glorifying God for the incredible works that God performed through Paul and Barnabas, the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentile population against them. Together they conspired to inflict physical harm. Perhaps concerned for the safety of the new converts, the team then moved to Lystra, which is located south of Iconium. Miracles continued, including the healing of a lame man, born lame. Instead of attributing this sign to the Lord, the people thought that Paul and Barnabas were gods, little g gods, right? And there was a temple right outside the town. There was a temple to Zeus, Greek god. Come on in. The Greek god Zeus. And the pagan Greek religion was very strong in this town. Anyway, they thought that these guys were gods come back down to the ground, basically, from Mount Olympus. And when they found that, and they wanted to make sacrifices to them. They thought they were the gods Zeus and Hermes. It says only by strong efforts were the apostles able to restrain the people from offering sacrifices to them. It says angry that their religious beliefs were rejected, the populace was influenced by Jews arriving now from Antioch and Pisidia and Iconium. By the way, this was about 100 miles away. Tells you what the fervor of the Jews were about stopping Paul and Barnabas, right? They traveled 100 miles to persecute them additionally. That's interesting to see. Mm-hmm. So it says this time though Paul did not escape violence. Remember, he left before they got him. This time the mob stoned him and they left him for dead. Just a little note on this: when you're stoned back in those days, you were dead, or in the process of dying. This was interesting because they left him outside the city, but Paul wasn't dead. Instead, he stood up while the disciples were around him. He stood up and with them. It's interesting to see that. So instead of fleeing in fear, he then went back into the town. Wow. Then he traveled on to Derbe after that. It says the missionaries continued proclaiming the truth about Jesus, and they were received without any antagonism, apparently. After seeing many people come to Christ, Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra and Iconium and Antioch Pisidia. They were not intimidated by the previous persecutions. Instead, they were committed to encouraging disciples and strengthening the churches. Then, retracing their journey through Pisidia and Pamphylia, Paul and Barnabas made their way back to the original Antioch sending spot. Not the Antioch Pisidia, by the way. It's a different one. This is the one in Syria, I believe. Yeah, it's the one in Syria. Their sending church rejoiced to hear of God's grace in reaching so many of the Gentiles for Christ. So that gives us a little thumbnail sketch of what we're going to be talking about. Would you like to read one of our verses for us? Sure. Okay, great. That way you don't have to listen to me talk all the time. There you go. Thank you. So let's look at our first verse. Speaking of first verses. Before we do, though, I'm going to read the prelude to our focal verses because it gives us some good background. We already mentioned some of the things here, but it's good to read the background before we hit the verses. So Acts 14 verses 1 through 10 says, in Iconium, they entered the synagogue of the Jews together. Again, the same pattern, right? They go into the Jews first, right? And spoke in such a manner that a large number of people believed, both of Jews and Greeks. But the Jews who disbelieved stirred up the minds of the Gentiles. This is, by the way, not the Jews who believe, this is other Jews. Stirred up the minds of the Gentiles and embittered them against the brethren. Therefore, they spent a long time there speaking boldly with reliance upon the Lord, who was testifying to the word of his grace, granting that signs and wonders be done by their hands. But the people of the city were divided. Remember, we talked about things that divide us at the holidays, right? No, they had division as well. They were divided. Some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. And when an attempt was made by both the Gentiles and the Jews with their rulers to mistreat and stone them, they became aware of it and they fled to the city of Lycaonia Lystra, and Derbe, and the surrounding region. And there they continued to preach the gospel. And then it says, at Lystra, they encountered a man who was sitting, who had no strength in his feet, lame from his mother's womb. He was born this way. Okay, everybody knew who he was, and knew he couldn't walk. He had never walked. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke, who, when he had fixed his gaze on him and had seen that he had faith to be made well, said with a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And he leaped up and began to walk. This is so reminiscent of those miracles we saw Jesus perform in the Gospels, right? It's amazing to me because, you know, anybody who's ever seen children at a very young age, they don't know how to walk. They have to be taught how to do it. They have to be taught to get their balance, right? Mm-hmm. One foot barely moving ahead of the other foot when they start to stumble along, right? This person who never walked sprang to his feet and began to walk all over the place. That tells you that was a miracle straight from God. Anyway, so that's where we saw. We're in Lystra now, and this happened. Everybody knew this man. He probably begged every day at the main gate or something like that. They knew his family. They see him in front of them. Let's look at our first thing here. Misdirected worship. So this is a very pagan town. Like I said, there's this temple to Zeus, excuse me, the Greek main god, if you will, right there at the edge of the city, outside the city a little bit. Anyway, we're going to read these verses, and I want you to listen for how Paul and Barnabas became misunderstood. Okay, you got number 1, right? Could you read it for us, please?
When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." And they began calling Barnabas Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priests of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds.
Okay, this town is physically located further away from a lot of places. It was kind of a almost an island to itself in a way, the way they describe it. And if you look at the map thing here, Lystra is separated quite a bit from a lot of places as well. And it's near these mountainous areas. And yes, they probably knew Greek, but they also had their own dialect as well. So we got communication issues here too, right? We also have what kind of issues with these people?
They worshipped other gods.
Okay, they're worshiping these pagan deities, right? So they have these kind of things going on with them. And they see what Paul and Barnabas did, right? And they said, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." Wow. So what was the reaction of the crowd then in general, do you think, when they saw this man healed in front of them?
Marveling.
What?
Marveling.
Marvel.
Oh, marveling. Yes. They're astounded. They're a stupendous thing just happened in front of us. Could they explain it? They thought they could, actually.
Yeah,
What did they think?
they thought it was Zeus.
Yeah. In their experience, their religious experience, they had the belief of the Greek gods and goddesses. And there is actually, it's an interesting thing here in my Bible commentary notes. A couple things I was going to read about this. Lystra was primarily a Greek city, and the people who worship Greek gods. The long-held traditions among them who worship pagan gods include stories of gods taking on human form and visiting the people. Zeus was the chief god. Hermes was the messenger of the gods, and the two of the false deities who were thought to visit Earth. They were the two. The people believed that these gods would provide or withhold blessings based on how they were received. So they're thinking these gods have come to test us. How will we react? You know, and now why is this important? Because there's also this a fable, a myth, a story. We'll call it a story that they had. That was you know how you kind of put stock in a story you've heard over and over and over again, even though it probably isn't true. You know, same thing happens to other people as well. It says that their names might have been related to this fable. that Hermes and Zeus once visited Lystra, their town.
Oh,
Their town. They once in the past did this. And established, when they came, they established a priesthood for the temple there. So in their stories, it's sort of like the kid, the guy, the Pied Piper, the story of how he played this pipe and all the kids followed him out of town, something like that. Or the one where St. Patrick got all the poisonous snakes out of Ireland. So sadly, there's never been any poisonous snakes in Ireland. But that's what the story says. So anyway. So according to this legend, those who had rejected these two gods, Zeus and Hermes, they were killed in a flood. They were killed in a flood. So these people have that background. They have this background. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they're thinking along those lines anyway. And then they see these two people heal this guy who cannot be healed in a normal sense. Suddenly whole in front of them. What would be, if you were one of them, what would be your reaction?
Would you the Lyconians?
Yeah, no, the Lystrians.
Or Lystrians, yeah. I would.
You probably had the same thoughts.
And my reference here mentions that in Lyconia or Lystra, it was believed that the gods had already come down previously.
Right, that's what I was saying. I was reading that story right here.
Yeah.
And those who didn't believe them were killed in a flood.
Oh, okay, I missed that part.
Yeah, that's part of the story. So, and they also believed that the gods would either give them or withhold blessings. So they had this in their background.
Yeah.
Here comes Paul and Barnabas and heal this man. So would there be a natural thing, is what I'm getting at?
Blessing was bestowed.
Yeah, you think, wow, that's them again. Just like the story we were told as kids. That's them. What are we going to do? What would you do? You say, that's Zeus and Hermes.
so the priest.
I want a blessing.
Yeah, I want a blessing. Yeah, I want to be blessed too. And the high priest to Zeus, the temple right outside town, wanted to get in on us too. So he brings in some sacrifices.
A bull.
He brings in oxen and garlands. So they had these oxen. They were probably decorated with flowers and with greenery. And they were brought to the gates, and they were going to do something special for a pagan sacrifice. Right? So this is the situation that Paul and Barnabas are in. These Christian men, right? So if you were Paul and Barnabas, how would you react to that? Now we're going to get into that in just a moment here. But what would be your reaction? Because we had a miscommunication for one thing, right? They thought they were this when they were not that, right? Would you be...
Paul was, they were upset. They were both of them upset.
Yeah.
Well, they rent their clothes,
Yes. That's a question here also. I forgot about these here. How can we make sure our witness keeps the focus on Jesus and not ourselves? And for them, that was a difficult thing because they thought they were doing just that. But the people jumped to the wrong conclusion, didn't they? It says, what explanations have you encountered from unbelievers who deny God's works? Has there been a situation like that too? I think I brought up evolution. To counter creation, they come up with the myth of evolution, and they create the science around it to support it. Is this an uncommon thing, or is this a fairly common thing in the history of mankind?
Very common.
Very common.
Very.
You may not know this, but there's something called geocentricity. Ever heard of that term before? That's a big $10 phrase. It was the belief that all the other planets and stars rotated around Earth. Geocentricity.
Oh.
Geo meaning Earth is in the center of the universe, and all these and they had these elaborate formulas, mathematics and everything. They could prove it without a doubt that these things are doing these things. And the only thing that was kind of odd was the planets themselves. They couldn't differentiate between them because they didn't have the means to do it back then. And the planets were called planets which had to sometimes wander around, appear to wander. They didn't fit into their mathematical models. I mean, they're smart people back then with math, but they just had a way to observe things. But there's this person who discovered something different. He called it heliocentricity. Heliocentricity. That means helo is sun. It means that the sun is the middle of our universe right here, and things rotate around it. Now there's something that discovery, which was a telescope, and see it for yourself, they would still say, no, that can't be.
Yeah.
We believe this story. So we have something like that in our own background, don't we? In history. It's not uncommon, that's what I'm saying.
Well, it's the flat earth theory too.
Well, then there's the flat earth theory before that, yes.
Well, it's still going on too.
Some people, yeah.
Yeah?
But for the most part, most of mankind's sciences have gone beyond that.
Somebody's proved it true. They put a level on the ground and it was right in between the marks.
Anyway,
It's a flat earth.
Anyway, as you might expect, it says Paul and Barnabas were horrified by this response. And so let's see what they responded with. Let's look at their next point, which is proclaiming the living God. We talk about misdirected worship. No, don't worship him as Zeus and Hermes. And by the way, why did they choose Zeus and Hermes? Because of that story, probably, that had those two characters in it. But also, Zeus was the chief of the gods. And they called Barnabas the chief of the gods, and Hermes was the orator. And who was doing the talking? Paul. That's why they did it, probably. And they think that maybe Barnabas was bigger, too, than Paul. There may have been that, or older looking, or something. There's some reason why they assigned that. It doesn't mean anything. It's just that's what they did.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's look at the next point. Next point is proclaiming the living God. And we have verses 14 through 18 of Acts chapter 14. And on these next 5 verses, I want you to listen to how Paul and Barnabas explained who God really is. He's not who you're thinking right now. It's something different, right? Who's got number 2?
I do.
Okay.
But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of it, they tore their robes and rushed out into the crowd, crying out and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are also men of the same nature as you, and preaching the gospel to you that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In generations gone by, he permitted all the nations to go their own way, and yet he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Even saying these things with difficulty, they restrained the crowd from offering sacrifice to them."
So we see that there's some really interesting phrases and key words and ideas here. Any of these jump out at you here as we're reading these verses? What was their first response? First of all, let's talk about that.
They rushed into the crowd. And,
Okay, just right before that though. Before they rushed in the crowd.
yeah, they tore their clothes.
They tore their clothes. Now, we don't understand that in today's culture that much. Because we don't do that. But this was a symbol of grieving, of anguish, of deep anguish. And they would have to do something physical to show that anguish, okay? And so they would tear their clothes. It was a common thing, not just Jewish thing. It was a common thing. So this was something that probably the Greeks fully understood. Hey, these people who were worshiping as God, they're anguished about this. They're concerned. And when you read this thing here, do you see any tie-ins to the Old Testament being stated here, or not?
There's some instances in the Old Testament of people tearing.
Well, yeah. But I mean, they're not saying though. If you remember our father Abraham or Isaac or Job, you don't see any of that. You don't see any of that, or the prophet Isaiah saying something, because these are what? This is a pagan town. There's no Jewish people here. Very little Jewish people here. Let's put it that way. They are approaching it. What I'm saying is they're approaching it differently. And this is kind of a sermonette right here. Paul's trying to reach these people where they're at. Okay. When there was a town with a sizable Jewish population, he would go to the synagogue. He'd teach them based on what the prophets said. We know that Jesus was the Messiah. But they're not doing this here. They're saying, you need to realize there's this one creator. You're worshiping something that's vain. We are presenting you the one living God. And what did this God do?
Did all these things, created the earth and
all these things.
The skies and the seas, yeah.
Right. So he's meeting them where they're at. He knew who they were, and they would not understand the Jewish references. So he approached them differently than what you saw in earlier towns.
In another scripture, it talks about, says, you worship all these gods and one of them is an unknown God, and we
Sure.
speak of that God.
And that was a Greek situation as well, by the way. They were it was a place where they discussed those kind of deep thoughts.
Right.
It was a very intellectual area. I forgot the name of the place on Mars. It was on Mars Hill. But yes, and they were aware of the Jewish God. But they weren't aware of Jesus, because when he talked about rising from the dead, they got, oh, wait a minute, on that particular thing you were talking about. But anyway, here it's interesting to see how he goes to creation. He tells them that the God that we worship is the one who made all these things. So he's trying to reach them where they're at. But the interesting term here that they used, where was this? There we go. There's the word I was looking for. In verse 15, saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? Why are you trying to worship us and sacrifice these things? We are also men of the same nature as you, and we preach the gospel to you that you should turn from these vain things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in it." Now, that sentence alone makes sense to us, right? But we got to remember where these people are at. Where are they? They're deep into this pagan belief. And so he just told them what? It's all worthless. He used the word vain. And I was reading about that. Where was that? Hold on here, I'll find it. Means worthless. The Greek wording indicates something unreal or unproductive. Such things add no benefit. They serve no useful purpose. That's this Greek word he's using. They are empty. They are profitless. Anything related to false gods has no genuine value, is what the purpose of him using this word. In contrast, the missionary shared a message of infinite value. And so, would it have been an easy thing for them to accept?
No.
Probably not. If you think about it, anytime, if you've ever come up against something that you always believed was a certain way, and suddenly you realize, no, it's not that way. Was it an easy thing to accept?
No.
Probably not, right? Whatever it might be, maybe it's the Easter Bunny or
Yeah.
whatever. Things like that in life, sometimes they happen, and we're stunned by the revelation that we never knew this. And we think, can this really be true? I'm not really sure. You go through a time of conflict. And that's what these people were probably going through at this point. And the Greek word, here's the other spot I was looking for. Worthless things indicate something unreal or unproductive. They add no benefit, no useful purpose. They have no genuine value. And so this is what they're trying to tell them. They're trying to share this with them. Did they have any idea what the good news, the gospel would be?
They didn't.
No. But they knew the word gospel because that would be a Greek word. They knew it was some sort of good news, good thing, is what they're trying to let them know, that this is something that you should realize in your life. Okay? And it says, even saying all these things, with difficulty they restrain the crowds from offering sacrifices to them. So when we come across people that maybe are in a different mindset on things, we might be hitting this kind of opposition, right? How do we deal with that? What do you think?
With patience and kindness, rather than forcefully, like driving the point home.
Right.
You
I think also
cultivate.
Yeah, and also what I would bring up personal things like what my life was before Christ and now what it is now. You can share those kind of things, something that you can get in common with them perhaps. It's a difficult thing though, right? It's not an easy thing.
I appreciate the part that he says, in the past he let all the nations go their own way, but now he was teaching this new way.
Now Christ has come.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So it says, how can we point out God's work and action for others? This is what he did. He pointed out what God had done, how God had created the world, how God took care of us, how God sent his only son for us, right? He pointed out these kind of things. We can do the same thing. we can do that same thing. It says, in what ways does our daily life testify to the nature of God? Do we depend on God or not? You know, people are smart. If you say you're a Christian, you don't live a Christian life. You know, you do the things that would be considered non-Christian. I don't know what it might be. You know what I'm saying? Do you think that makes a difference when people see you and listen to your words? If your life reflects it? Sure they do, right? And that's what these people, they saw these miracles and they misunderstood them. And they attributed them to these pagan deities. And they're saying, no, those are worthless things. That'd be a hard thing to understand. I'm just looking from my viewpoint. I would have a hard time dealing with that if I was them. So I can understand how that would go. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you had to explain something that was like a brand new idea, the gospel, to somebody else? You know, you think in this day and age, everybody's heard about Jesus, right? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And how do people react sometimes? That's the question. I have a acquaintance of mine that I knew who had gone to Turkey as part of the Air Force, and one of the Turks there, one of the national people, what do they call them people? Turks, had asked him some questions about, "Are you from America? Are you a Christian?" And so he's talking about Christ. Some people overheard him. Basically beat him up, stabbed him, and were going to kill him. And what he did was against the law. You cannot talk to a Turkish national about another religion other than Islam.
They beat who? They beat the friend or
the person who...
The American.
The American.
Oh.
It was a serviceman. He was probably told not to do this, but he couldn't help it because the guy had asked. But anyway, the Air Force quickly put him on a plane, flew him out of there, and the Turks were really mad because it's against their law for people to do this. They wanted that guy back. They wanted to put him on trial and put him in a deep hole somewhere, probably kill him, I don't know. But that just shows you that happens in this world today. These kind of reactions can happen. And this is what similarly happened here. Let's look at the next part here. We looked at misdirected worship, proclaiming the living God, opposition faced. Did we hit that one yet? No, we didn't. Right? Number 3.
Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They lied. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered round him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day he and Barnabas left for Derbe.
Wow. This is exciting, actually. So what kind of escalation did we see? What kind of increase in danger did the apostles face here?
Death. Potential, I mean...
Ultimate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Paul was nearly put to death, or maybe, at least it was strong prayer that maybe healed him or something.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting here is it was the Jews that came. And they came 100 miles away. They were following them. Their hatred of what they were saying was so great, apparently, that they decided to hound them some more. And they followed them all the way to Lystra. Because they came from Antioch and Iconium. They came from the previous place they were at. I guess it was Iconium?
Antioch and Iconium.
Yeah. And so they instigated, they stirred them up. This is why this seems so strange. You say, well, why would the Jews do that? Who are the Jews? They're fearers of God, right? And their prophets spoke of Messiah. And this man, Jesus, fit all the prophecies. They hated them so bad, they followed them, stirred up the people, and had them stoned. This is remarkable.
Well, it's like you were saying, though, them calling their worship vain.
Yeah.
Probably didn't take much to stir them up.
It was probably all part and parcel of what was going on. Yeah. And a little thing about stoning people back then. When they stoned you, you were usually always dead. There's very few actual circumstances where it said that the people were fine after the stoning. No. You were injured grievously or you died. And they knew what they were doing because they'd stoned people before. They knew how to kill people by stoning. They did it a lot. It was routine in some cases You were gonna say?
It wasn't quick.
No, it wouldn't have been quick either. It would have been deadly.
They're not using boulders. They were using. Usually, you can pick up with a single hand.
Yeah, they were using heavy stones. They were big
stones
like that. Yeah, and they would all take a turn, and they'd do it until the person didn't move anymore. And usually a pile of stones was on top of the person by that time. But it said they stoned him and dragged him out of the city and just dumped him, supposedly him to be dead. And then it says the disciples that stood around. The pictures that they stood around Paul's body, and Paul stands up. Now, was this a miracle? Was it a resurrection? We don't know. Okay, it doesn't say here. Okay,
It was a miracle.
but the fact that he was apparently not injured after a stoning is remarkable. We'll say that at least, right? The text does not say, and God raised him up in this particular sense. But I think you're pretty sound ground to say that God healed him at least.
Yeah.
Because of what he did afterwards. But then, so what would you do after you'd been stoned? You'd probably keep on going down the road away.
Yeah.
Right? Not Paul. What did Paul do?
Turned around and went back.
He got up and he entered the city. It didn't carry him on a litter to the city. He entered the city. He walked into the city. If I had been somebody who just stoned that guy and he's walking past me on the city, I go, I'm going back inside and closing the door.
Yeah.
Because this is not what's supposed to happen.
That or you follow him because
Yeah.
this guy has something.
Now, they impressed a lot of people in the town, and there's people there that became disciples. We know that as well, by the way. But it says the next day he went away with Barnabas to Derbe. So apparently they said, well, we need to go to another town now. Things here are pretty much as far as we can go. Let's look at our last point. Any comments or questions? I think we covered all of it there. There's other instances of Paul relating about things that happened to him. In 2 Corinthians 11:25, I have additional verses over here. In 2 Timothy 3:11, I was going to read those verses. Anybody want to read one of them for me?
Sure.
Which one do you want to read?
The last one I'll have found.
Okay, you got 2 Timothy 3:11?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take 2 Corinthians.
Oh, okay. 2 Corinthians 11:25. Go ahead and read that one then.
3 times I was beaten with sticks. Once they tried to kill me by throwing stones at me. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea.
So he's relating to the different things when he was persecuted or things that happened to him on a missionary journey there, right? So this is the stoning he probably is referring to right here. Go ahead and read yours.
He doesn't mention being bitten by the snake.
No. A lot of other things too. Go ahead.
And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, and the father the child, and the children shall, cause them to be put to death.
So is that I'm sorry.
That's 21 and 22 in the King James.
No, that's I meant 2 Timothy 3:11.
Oh.
My fault. I should have pointed that one out.
Oh, I had said the last one, and you said go ahead and read.
my fault. I'm sorry.
And the brother shall deliver up the brother to death. Oh, wait a minute. And you shall be hated by all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved.
So that's Jesus saying this is what's going to happen to you, right? And matter of fact, Jesus also told Ananias that this man is going to be suffering many things, right? Now let's look at also 2 Timothy 3:11. You want to read that? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I can take it again. You know that I was treated badly. You know that I suffered greatly. You know what kinds of things happened to me in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. You know how badly I have been treated. But the Lord saved me from all of my troubles.
Wow. Yeah. Now, an interesting thing about that particular thing was the fact that Timothy, he's writing that to Timothy, right? And Timothy's mother and I think grandmother, is it Lois and Eunice? I'm not going to find it now. Well, anyway, they suppose that they're from this area, Lystra, okay? That they became disciples. And when they did, they influenced Timothy. And then later on, Timothy becomes this man who Paul writes to later on. And it's quite interesting to see what happened, through the fact that the fact that Paul and Barnabas were faithful to what God wanted to do, And we see the result was the secondary fruit of Timothy later on. Kind of neat to see that. We don't know all those things, we just see that little connection in there that we can maybe assume a few things like that. Anyway, I know I read it somewhere else. Where did I read that? Oh well, I'm not going to find it. Let's look at the last one because the thing just rang. Encouragement given. We looked at misdirected worship, proclaiming the living God, opposition faced, and encouragement given. Who's got number 4?
I think one
Me?
of those.
You got? Oh no, I got 4. Apparently, I have 4. Yay! Encouragement given. It says after they preached the gospel in that city, they had many disciples. Made many disciples. They returned to Lystra. This is what they went to Derbe. Remember? They returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, Pisidium, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraged them to continue in the faith, and saying, through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. When they had appointed elders for them in every church, having prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord, in whom they had believed. So we see that Paul and Barnabas did what? They not only prepared the ground and sowed it, but they also went back to make sure, and they to tend it essentially.
Water it, tend it.
Yeah. We see that they went back to those places that persecuted them. They weren't afraid. They went back to them, and instead they strengthened the souls of those disciples. In each town there was disciples that followed them, right? And they encouraged them. And they didn't just stop there. They found out they found in those churches leaders, elders they could appoint to continue to teach, to continue to bring up more disciples. And it's an amazing thing that they went through this persecution and they just went back again.
Well,
and to teach them and to help them.
it wouldn't be easy to be one of those new learners in those cities. They knew that everybody persecuted these men that were teaching.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. In verses 24 through 28, which is kind of the summation here, somebody's a little upset. They passed through Pisidia, Antioch, and came to Pamphylia. When they had spoken the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. And from there they sailed to Antioch. Now this is the original Antioch. Okay, on your map, it's the one over here in Syria. So don't get confused between Pisidia, Antioch up here. They went back here, and they went all the way back to the original Antioch in Syria. And it says, from which they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had accomplished. When they had arrived, they gathered the church together and began to report all the things that God had done with them and how He had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. And they spent a long time with the disciples. They rejoiced with them. They shared with them all these things that happened, and they were rejoicing with them with the report of how God was at work. Kind of a cool thing to see. I love these historical accounts that Luke wrote in the book of Acts. But the encouragement thing is so important. We need to encourage you to not just have them saved, we need to teach them, right? And bring them up in the Lord so they can go forth and make more disciples. In Acts 13, 2 through 3, we see, I heard it. It says, and while they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work which I have called them. Then when they had fasted and prayed, they laid their hands on them and sent them away. We see that repeated over and over. That this is what they would do. They lift them up in prayer. They lay hands on the new disciples, and more would come into the church. And this is the pattern that they did. The young churches needed insights from the apostles to choose those who would be strong leaders in this very pagan culture, and the role of prayer and fasting in this process, just as it was when Paul and Barnabas were first set out to the mission field. That's what was in Acts 13. They did those same things. Kind of exciting. There's a time I'd like to go back in a time machine. I would like to see some of these things happening. That'd be exciting. That'd be exciting.
Fun trip.
Last thing, let's conclude here. 4 main points today. 4, not 3, 4. It says we can expect that some will not attribute God's works to Him, choosing instead to worship other people or things. Maybe it won't be Zeus and Hermes, but maybe something else. Maybe the God of evolution. I don't know. Second, we should take every opportunity to communicate clearly who God is and what He has done. That's what they did, right? They showed Him the God of creation and how He cared for people. Third point, we We can prepare for opposition by building strong relationships with other believers. Remember, the disciples did what when he was stoned? They stood around him to encourage and to help, right? And the last point, be ready to encourage others to remain steadfast in the faith in the face of hardships. What makes sharing our faith so hard sometimes? Fear, the unknown, maybe past experiences, right?
I don't want to mess this up.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Holy Spirit can help us. He draws that out so we can say the right words and things like that. And this is kind of a rhetorical question as we finish up. How can we embrace the divine opportunities that Christ sends our way? I think we can do that by being ready, preparing ourselves, knowing Scripture, cultivating the fields, if you will, first, and then planting the seed and watering, preparing our own hearts too in that way. And any comments or questions on these verses we read today? I think I got everything right. Let's see. Yeah, got that one. Yep, I read that one. Okay, good. Well, let's have a word of prayer then. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the examples we see from Paul and Barnabas as they followed the instructions of the Holy Spirit, Lord. And they went to these towns where people were hungry for the gospel, Lord. Even the people that had never heard about God before. There was disciples made in Lystra when you wouldn't expect it. If you were looking at the outside of it, you'd say, no, don't bother going there. But they did, and we see the results, Lord. Thank you so much. Help us to also have that kind of unction to not miss the opportunities, the divine appointments, Lord, to share the truth about who you are. And specifically, give us boldness, give us strength, Lord, to follow up on these things. Thank you in your Son's name. Amen. So, appreciate you guys being here. Had a great time. You guys online as well. Again, this is Grace Baptist Church. My name is Norm Ellis. This is the Adult One Bible Study. Stand by in the next hour. Our pastor, Matthew, will be bringing us the message. So stand by the same YouTube channel. And thank you for being with us. God bless you all.